well, after the war, it was established by František Gak, who was professor of forensic medicine at the Charles University in Prague. In 1952, he examined the bullets, and he was able to establish, the bullets taken from the bodies, that the weapons that had been used to shoot the prisoners were revolvers manufactured by the German firm of H. Henschau and Company of Dorlach near Karlsruhe. And then in 1971 there was correspondence in the Times suggesting that Katyn massacres couldn't have been done by the Germans, since they went in for machine gunning and gas chambers rather than dispatching prisoners in the way the Katyn victims had been killed, i.e. by a shot in the back of the head. Well, our friend Henry Mettelmann, who's a member of this society, he was a former German soldier and was then, and I think now still is, living in Godalming in Surrey. And he wrote into the Times, and he said, as a German soldier, and at that time convinced of the righteousness of our cause, I have taken part in many battles and actions during the Russian campaign. I haven't been to Katyn nor to the forest nearby, but I well remember the hullabaloo when the news broke in 1943 about the discovery of the ghastly mass grave near Katyn, which area was then threatened by the Red Army. Joseph Goebbels, as history records show, has fooled many people. After all, that was his job, and few would dispute his almost complete mastery of it. What is surprising indeed, however, is that it still shows evidence in the pages of the Times 30-odd years later. Writing from experience, I do not think that at that late time of the war, Goebbels managed to fool many German soldiers in Russia on the Katyn issue. German soldiers knew about the shot in the back of the head, all right. We German soldiers knew that the Polish offers were dispatched by none other than our own. On top of that, very many witnesses came forward to attest to the presence of Polish prisoners in the region after the Germans had taken it over. Maria Alexandrovna Sashnieva, a local primary school teacher, gave evidence to a special commission set up by the Soviet Union in September 1943. That's immediately after the area was liberated from the Germans, to the effect that in August 41, 2 months after the Soviet withdrawal, she had hidden a Polish war prisoner in her house. His name had been Józef Lok, and he'd spoken to her about ill treatment that he'd suffered and that Polish prisoners suffered under the Germans. She said, when the Germans arrived, they seized the Polish camp and instituted a strict regime in it. The Germans didn't regard the Poles as human beings. They oppressed and outraged them in every way. On some occasions, Poles were shot without any reason at all, and he decided to escape. And several other witnesses gave evidence that they'd seen Poles during August and September 1941 working on the roads. Witnesses also testified to roundups by the Germans of escaped Polish prisoners in the autumn of 1941. And Danilenko, a local peasant, was among several witnesses who testified to this. He said special roundups were held in our place to catch Polish war prisoners who'd escaped. Some searches took place in my house 2 or 3 times. After one such search, I asked the headman whom they were looking for in our village. He said that an order had been received from the German Kommandantur, according to which searches were to be made in all houses without exception, since Polish war prisoners who had escaped from the camp were hiding in our village. So obviously, the Germans did not shoot the Poles in full sight of local witnesses, but there's nonetheless sufficient evidence from local people as to what was happening. And one witness was Alexeyeva, who'd been detailed by the headman of her village to serve the German personnel at a country house in the section of Katyn forest known as Kozy Gori, which had been the rest home of the Smolensk administration of the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs. And I might mention that at the time that the Soviets were using that property, it was not fenced off. People were free to come and go. It was a recreation area for the local people, and there was nothing to stop people going anywhere they wanted to. But once the Germans came in, the whole place was cordoned off, and so that the local people weren't able actually to use the area for recreation as they'd been used to doing previously. Anyway, this house was situated some 700 meters from where the mass graves were found. And Alexeyeva said, at the close of August and during most of September 1941, several trucks used to come practically every day to the Kozygori country house. At first I paid no attention to that, but later I noticed that each time these trucks arrived at the grounds of the country house, they stopped for half an hour, and sometimes for a whole hour, somewhere on the country road connecting the country house with the highway. I drew the conclusion because sometime after these trucks reached the grounds of the country house, the noise they made would cease. Simultaneously with the noise stopping, single shots would be heard. The shots followed each other at short but approximately even intervals. Then the shooting would die down, the trucks would drive right up to the country house. German soldiers and NCOs came out of the trucks. Talking noisily, they went to wash in the bathhouse, after which they engaged in drunken orgies. On days when the trucks arrived, more soldiers from some German military units used to arrive at the country house. Special beds were put up for them, and shortly before the trucks reached the country house, armed soldiers went to the forest, evidently to the spot where the trucks stopped, because in half an hour they returned in these trucks, together with the soldiers who lived permanently in the country house. On several occasions I noticed stains of fresh blood on the clothes of 2 lance corporals. From all this I inferred that the Germans brought people in the truck to the country house and shot them. And Alexeyeva also discovered that the people being shot were Polish prisoners. She said, once I stayed at the country house somewhat later than usual. Before I finished the work which had kept me there, a soldier suddenly entered and told me I could go. He accompanied me to the highway. Standing on the highway, 150 or 200 meters from where the road branches off to the country house, I saw a group of about 30 Polish war prisoners marching along the highway under heavy German escort. I halted near the roadside to see where they were being led, and I saw that they turned towards our country house at Kozygori. Now, since by that time I had begun to watch closely everything going on at the country house, I became interested. I went back some distance along the highway, hid in the bushes near the roadside, and waited. In some 20 or 30 minutes, I heard the familiar single shots. And the other 2 requisition maids at the country house, Mikhailova and Konakhovskaya, gave supporting evidence, and as did other residents in the area. Basilevsky, the director of the Smolensk Observatory, was appointed deputy burgomeister to somebody called Menshagin, a Nazi collaborator. Basilevsky was trying to secure the release from German custody of a teacher, Zhiglinski, and persuaded Menshagin to speak to the German commander of the region, von Schwetz, about this matter. Menshagin did this, but reported back that it was impossible to secure this release because instructions had been received from Berlin prescribing the strictest regime be maintained. Basilevsky then recounted his conversation with Menshagin. I involuntarily retorted, "Can anything else be stricter than the regime existing at the camp?" Menshagin looked at me in a strange way and, bending to my ear, answered in a low voice, "Yes, there can be. The Russians can at least be left to die off. But as to the Polish war prisoners, the orders say they're simply to be exterminated." And after liberation, in fact, Menshagin's notebook was found, written in his own handwriting, as confirmed by expert graphologists. And page 10, dated the 15th of August 1941, notes, "All fugitive war prisoners are to be detained and delivered to the commandant's office." Well, you know, what more proof could you possibly have that the Poles were still there during this period of German occupation?